Hi, William Tramp, also known as this FNGM here. Fun fact, I am known in some circles as being a painter of miniature terrain, which is pretty cool actually. I really kind of enjoy being known for that. But a really fun fact about that for me is that 2 to 3 years ago, I didn't know how to paint at all. I had never touched a paintbrush outside of a grade school elementary class. I had for a long time written off being artistic as something that I just couldn't do. I don't draw, I don't paint, I don't do anything that creates that type of content in the world, and it was always something that was out of reach for me. A few years ago, I played at a convention where I saw this beautiful dungeon setup out on the table. I got to play on that dungeon setup with little miniatures running around, and it was awesome. And the wow factor of seeing an entire dungeon laid out before me was just one of the coolest things. And that was a feeling that I wanted to share with others. I wanted to give my players that wow factor. So I went on to YouTube and I started watching some videos, primarily videos from Blackmagic Craft and Fat Dragon Tom. And I learned a ton about painting. Not only did I learn that it actually is a lot easier than it looks, but also it's cheap if you do it right. There's not a ton of investment that really needs to go into being able to get the materials. Pretty much you just need a paintbrush and apple barrel paints, from like Walmart, right? I for the longest time I thought that I'd have to use things like Citadel paints, $5 a pot, and you only get this much, and I have to paint a whole building. No, I learned so much, and as a result of learning that, I've just been painting up a storm. So today what I'd like to do is I would like to share some of my knowledge with you. I want to talk about Tudor style houses. Well, okay, I'm showing off these little pieces here, but what I mean is how to paint Tudor style houses with these, kind of where you have the wood beams and the stucco, right? Excuse my coughing. I paint a lot of these styles of houses. In fact, this one I sell on my store, link in the thing below. But my point here today is not to sell you on purchasing something of mine. My point is to sell you on the idea that you also can paint like me, if that's what you wish to do. So we're going to be practicing, or I'm going to be showing off on how to paint Tudor style houses using these pieces from Fat Dragon Games. They're these little wall pieces. They connect together, right? Kind of like Dwarven Forge, right? Modular terrain sets. And there's this pack of like inn or tavern walls that I think is a great way to practice painting Tudor style. This is how I got my style, learning how to paint this style. How I got my start learning how to paint the style, because they're cheap to produce if you have a cheap 3D printer, or they're cheap to buy if you go onto Etsy or something, and you can practice on them and not really put a lot of financial investment in your learning journey, which is a big thing for me. I got 3 kids, so financial investment is a big concern of mine. Okay, so yeah, let's go ahead and get started with materials. Okay, step 1, prime your pieces. I use Rust-Oleum Primer Ultra Matte Black to get that dark base coat. You can use whatever color you want, but that's what I use. All right, so this is going to be right here kind of the goal. I want to recreate this type of piece right here. This is already pre-painted. The goal here is to show a process so you can replicate pieces like this. I'm going to be showing 2 different styles of this. One is going to use more of a reddish tint to the wood. Another is going to use kind of the brown that's already shown on that piece right there. So I'm just kind of dividing this out into 2 different piles, redder wood and brown wood. Now, here are the colors I'm going to be using. I'm going to be using Burnt Umber. All of these are apple barrel except for one full card. So I got Burnt Umber. Then I'm going to be using Nutmeg Brown. I'll be using Chocolate Bar. Nutmeg Brown and Chocolate Bar will be the difference between the 2 different types of wood, by the way. For the stucco, I've got Light Mocha here, and I also have an Antique White. Now, I also use 2 different washes. I have a black wash and a brown wash. You can use any black wash or brown wash that you want to use. I personally make my own using Blackmagic Crafts style. I put the link in the thing below on how to make your own, but you can use any kind of black or brown wash. This is just what I do. All right, at the very end, I'm going to be using Territorial Beige to kind of age it all up, and then I'll be using this Folk Art Silver to kind of get the little metal rivets that are all over the floor. That's not necessary for Tudor style. That's just what I do for these particular pieces from Fat Dragon Games. All right, so we're going to start off with the Burnt Umber. Now, the goal with the Burnt Umber here is I want to make sure that I'm painting the wood beams. Now, I'm going to be using this angle brush. It's kind of big and thick. It's about as wide as the beams are, so I can just get a clear 100% coverage right off the bat. When I used to paint Tudor walls, I used to go ahead and do the stucco first, and then I would go and do the beams. This was a terrible idea. This actually ruined me on the process. This is what I learned, is that I need to do the wood beams first and then the stuccos. I am a messy painter. I'm a messy painter. And if I try to go for the stucco first and the wood beams, I end up having to repaint over the stucco all the time. So instead, I learned to just start off with the wood beams, and I could be as messy as I wanted because I can hide the mistakes with the stucco later. So that's what I'm doing. I'm going to go ahead and start off here painting those wood beams very sloppily, I might add. Just getting 100% coverage with that burnt umber. I'm also going to get the floor there for the most part. I try to leave a little bit of black and the cracks showing, but it's not really that necessary. A good wash can kind of fix that. But I do like to let some of the black peek through on the floor because it has like really deep rivets in there. But for the beams, I just go 100% coverage. Again, you might notice that the stucco portions that are going to be painted stucco I'm not taking care at all. And that's kind of the point. You know, some people think you have to paint with a really steady hand. You don't. You can be sloppy. You just need to know how to do it. I'm going to go ahead and speed up this process, by the way, because I don't want to sit here and ramble on about 6 whole pieces. Okay. All right, so I've got the pieces completed here, or I've got not completed, but I got the dark wash. So here's where we're going to deviate between the two. Nutmeg brown is what I did for the piece I already completed to give more of that brown wash. Oh, and let me just drop things all over the place, right? Nutmeg brown is what I use for my browner woods, and then I use chocolate bar for if I want more of a redder cast to the wood. So I'm going to be, again, doing 2 different styles here just to show off how you can choose whatever browns you want. These are just the 2 that I use to get a slightly different effect on those wood beams. Okay. So when I do this, I'm going to use the same brush that I used before, but this time I'm not going to be going for 100% coverage over those wood beams. I want that burnt umber to shine through. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some of the paint on my brush, but then I'm going to wipe some of it off. I'm not going for a full dry brush here. I'm going to go for kind of like a wet dry brush, you know, like a damp brush, I guess, right? And I'm just going to streak across the wood beams with the nutmeg brown. Right, so it's really just to give another color dimension to this. For the divots that are in the wood, like those little lines, you know, that add texture, I really don't want this nutmeg brown down in those textures. So you notice when I do the floors and do the same thing with the floors, I'm painting over rather than with those divots to make sure that I really only get the top layers with this nutmeg brown. Okay, and again, it's not a dry brush because I want that color to shine through a lot more than a dry brush would, but it's not quite a thick wet brush either. Okay, let's go ahead and speed through this and let's get to the chocolate bar. Okay, I'm going to bring the chocolate bar in. Any brown could work, but I find chocolate bar has like this nice reddish tint to it. So with this, what I'm going to do here, I'm going to do this with another piece. Again, that same wettish brush style, right? That damp brush style. I don't know what we want to call it. And on this, I'm going to do the same thing, doing that kind of coating over, not 100% coating, but you know, some of that burnt umber still shining through. I'm going to do this on the wood beams. I am not going to do this on the floors. The reason why I like to do it this way is like paint the wood beams a different color than the floors. I think that it kind of provides some variation between the two. You know, so it's not all just like one solid block of brown all the way through, and kind of gives the idea that maybe at one point these wood beams had been painted, right? But with the floors, well, I like that nice wood finish, so I'm not going to be putting chocolate bar on that. I'm just going to be using straight up nutmeg on that. Okay, I'm going to paint 3 with the nutmeg, 3 with the chocolate bar, and then we'll let them dry and move on to the next step. Okay, so that's kind of what this looks like. You notice how the one has the more reddish tint, the other one is the more brown. The next step I'm going to be working on is we're going to be moving on to that stucco. And you can't see, I didn't put it in frame here, but the idea is that, you know, I mentioned before, we do the beams first and then the stucco. I made a mess of the stucco with the brown, but the paints that I'm using are going to cover it. The first one I'm going to use as my base for my stucco is a light mocha, and then I'm going to go ahead and just do some brushing with some antique white. So we're going to start off with that light mocha. Again, I'm using an angle brush, but the angle brush I've been using is too big. It's hard to get into some of those smaller squares, so I'm going to instead use kind of a smaller angle brush here. And the thing is that, again, the reason I use the angle brush is because, you know, getting these like straight lines is really important, and I find that with a small angle brush I can get, you know, kind of get those lines a lot more perfect just by moving it left to right and making sure my hand is angled to where the angle of the brush itself is like directly parallel to the lines, there. And you want to get a brush that's small enough to fit into the smallest square areas. And what I like to do when I paint these is I'm going to go ahead and outline and then paint the middle. So here, let me kind of show you what I mean here. So I'm going to start off with this light mocha here, and I'm going to get a little bit on this smaller angle brush. And then I'm going to go ahead and draw a outline. I'm going to push the brush up to the raise point that the beam makes, and then I'm going to angle it and do another line, and then I'm going to angle it and do another line. I box it in. Kind of box it in, leaving the very middle of the area kind of still black, and then I'll just go through and paint it, kind of paint through in the middle. And I know I'm not showing it very well right now, but the idea is that I'm going to use the raised portions of the menu to stop my brush, and I'm going to use the flat, straight line of the angle to get what I want. And I find it easier overall to use an angle brush rather than just a straight top brush like that does like a 90-degree angle, because I can't keep my hand that straight, but I can keep my arm at an angle and do it. It's a personal preference, but really the main point is don't use like pointed tip brushes. Use a brush with a flat line, and then just make the angle or make the flat top of the brush work for you. Okay, so again, as I mentioned, I'm using this light mocha, and I'm painting squares around the area, and then I'm painting the black in the middle. When I get to the smaller ones, I'm doing the same thing. I just make a little line, and then I flip the piece. I do the bottom line. Again, I'm framing it out, and once I get the square made with just a little bit of black in the middle, so you can see me doing it right there, there's the top, and then I'm going to do the other side real quick, and then I just go through and I paint the middle. Okay, this is my style. I'm going to do this exact same thing for the top of this piece, for the back of this piece, and I'm going to do it a total of four more times to get the other pieces, so we can go ahead and just fast forward through this. Okay, I've got all of the first layer of the stucco put in. One thing I kind of want to point out here is that first make sure you let them dry before you do anything. I always forget to say let them dry. Now you might notice that the edges aren't perfectly lining up, but they're pretty straight. The angle brush did a lot of work on that. But I was a little sloppy here. When I get over and actually accidentally kind of get some of that onto the wood beams, I'll just kind of wet my finger and then kind of just like try to wipe off some of it. You can also use like a cloth or something. I find that because I'm going to be adding in a weathering effect later, that it doesn't really matter too much if there's a little bit of that stucco color on there, because I'm going to be covering it up later. So you can be a little sloppy, because later steps are going to fix that. I also want to point out that my lines may not be perfectly straight, but here's the beautiful thing about miniatures versus miniature terrain. When you paint a miniature, people pick it up and they look at it real close, like inches away from their face. When you do terrain, people tend to see it from about 3 feet away. So as long as it passes the 3-foot rule, you're pretty good to go. Okay, the next step we need to do is we need to go ahead and add some depth to this. So I'm going to be using this antique white. And what I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to be dry brushing. Now, I'll tell you right off the bat, first of all, I'm going to use the same size brush as before, if not a smaller one. The idea is that I don't want to go to the edges. I just want to hit the middle. Now, I'm going to tell you right off the bat, I was supposed to dry brush this. I got a little bit heavy on it. I think I was just a little nervous that I was doing a tutorial video. But the idea is that this is a dry brush. You want just a little bit onto your brush, and then you want to just pretty much wipe it off. Now, I'm kind of just dabbing it off. And it still creates a nice effect. I could have taken more off here. So you can either dry brush or you can do kind of a damp brush. Either way, the idea is you're not going for 100% coverage here. And really, you're just trying to cover kind of the middle of each of these stucco sections. Now, it is going to create a contrast between the edges of the stucco where it meets the wood beams and the middle, but later on, when I add that weathering effect, it's going to kind of soften that a bit. Now, again, how much you want that contrast to be is going to be completely dependent on how much of this antique white you put onto the brush itself. Again, I wish I had added a little less, but that's okay. It's okay if you don't get it 100% perfect. I could have wiped off more, but honestly, the end result of this is still going to be pretty fantastic. You'll see what I mean here in a bit. All right, I'm going to go ahead and do all these pieces, so let's fast forward. Okay, so I've got the antique white on there. It's now time to do some washes. Again, I put the link in the thing below. I make my own washes, the brown wash here. I also have a black wash. I'm going to be completely coating these in this wash. Now, you'll notice I've laid all the pieces down on their backs. The reason why is there's a lot of cracks and divots, and I want to make sure that that brown wash really fills it in. And I'm also pointing to some cracks here as well. I'm pointing to cracks, and I'm also pointing to the divots in the floor. I want that wash to really fill that in. So I'm going to first do it on their backs so the cracks and the divots in the stucco and the wood beams get filled in, and then I'm going to wash again with it in a different position to make sure I get, real big coverage everywhere. Now look at that. As I start covering this in black wash, it already starts to kind of blend some of the colors together and really make those like slight differences really pop. Now I'm putting a little bit too much on there. What I'm doing, you'll notice I'm kind of using my brush to kind of like scrape off a little bit of the pooling there. That tends to be what I do. Now I'm going to go ahead and coat all of these in this brown wash, so I'll go ahead and fast forward a bit. Okay. My next step here is, I've let these dry a bit, and I want to make sure that I get those make those cracks in the wall really pop. And here's where I'm going to use a very thin brush. I'm going to take the black wash, and I'm just going to paint it into those cracks. Okay, I'm going to paint it into those cracks. Now you'll also notice in the back that there's a lot of spotting from the brown wash kind of on those walls. That's okay. Another highlight of antique white will kind of cover that up a bit if you feel that those divots are a bit too strong or it looks too spotty. But either way, for right now, I'm taking black wash and filling in those cracks to really make sure they pop. Okay, let's go and fast forward. Okay, we are on to the point where I mentioned I was going to flip the pieces. So I'm going to be doing the back of this as well. Now, I could lay them down at an angle like this, but what's going to end up happening is that all that wash is going to just kind of like fall off the edge there, and it's not going to pool in the places I need it to. So I'm going to go ahead and prop these up using other pieces that I have painted just to make sure they stay about as level as possible. So that's what's going on here. Okay, I went ahead and did the wash on the floors without showing it on camera. I also saw that there are a bit too many spots on that stucco like I had mentioned before, so I have already at this point gone over with a dry brush of the antique white to kind of go back over that again. So now I essentially have 3 tones on the stucco in certain places, which I like here. What I'm going to go ahead and do now is is what I call the weathering step. I'm going to be using this this light grayish brown called Territorial Beige, which I'm not showing directly on camera because, again, this is my first tutorial and I'm not particularly great at that. But the idea is that I want to dry brush it over all of the wood. And I'm going to be a little sloppy and have some overlap with the stucco here when I do this. The reason why is it'll add some more color variation to the stucco, and it's going to also kind of help tie things in, but again, also get that color variation. So I'm not purposely trying to get it on the stucco, but I'm not avoiding it either, Okay, and again, this is going to be done with a dry brush. So I don't want a lot of paint on my brush here. So when I dip it in here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to dip my brush into it, and I'm going to be using kind of a smaller one so I have more control with the smaller. I'm going to be wiping off almost all of it. So that way when I wipe it, the idea with dry brushing is that when you wipe it over a cloth, you want to barely see any come off of the brush onto the paper, and that's how you know you're ready to dry brush. So I'm going to go ahead and dry brush the wood beams and the floors all over these, and this is going to go ahead and weather these up a bit. It's going to give that effect of like not just solid brown, but again, it really adds that variation. You can use any color you want here for brown, but I tend to use a light grayish because it's a much larger contrast to the burnt umber and the nutmeg, or the burnt umber and the chocolate bar that I had before. And I also do think it's important to kind of point out that, again, with a dry brush, you want to go against the grain as much as possible, because if you go with those lines that are the darker colors, the wood grain, if you go with it, then that color is going to get in those recesses, and that's not what you want. You just want to hit the tops, right, as it were. So I'm going against the grain as I do this with very little paint on my brush. Okay, here we are. We're at this point, I've already done the weathering effect, so those are pretty much done. That's pretty much my style. And for these particular pieces, there are these nails in the floor, so I'm going to be using this silver to just kind of put little dots on the nails there. Just put a little bit on a very thin pointed brush, kind of like how you do eyes, right? You just get the thinnest pointed brush you can, and then just dot, 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 dot. This is not necessary for every single Tudor style. This obviously has really nothing to do with the style. I just want to make sure I cover those. So All right, that's it. Okay, and that's it. I've got the silver on. I've got it all painted. I'm going to be using this Rust-Oleum matte clear spray. This is what I'm going to use to seal it all. The idea is that, you know, once sealing the miniature terrain at the end with this clear spray will help in protecting it from like finger oils and water and such, and kind of let them bang against each other without chipping the paint. This is an extremely important step to go through. It protects them because you're going to be handling these things a lot and probably kind of roughly. So this matte spray, it's cheap. You can find it at Walmart or anywhere else, and you can keep going. All right. Now, I've already done the matte spray at this point, and I kind of just wanted to show you what the end result looks like. So here is the original piece, kind of set by one of the newer pieces. Again, I had mentioned I had put a little bit too much of that antique white on when I had done that dry brush stage, so that's why there's such a stark contrast between the two. Now, again, that's not necessarily bad. You know, if you're fine with that end result, then that's great. And honestly, I'm fine with this because, you know, again, if we go off of the 3-foot rule when it comes to miniature terrain, you know, hey, if it looks good 3 feet away, you're good to go. You know, then like this doesn't bother me too much, but if you want to know, that's what I would go back and I would redo. But kind of the whole thing with pieces like this, especially, and why I like using pieces like this, is that you can have slight variations between, you know, how well you painted it or not. But when people aren't looking at the individual tile pieces in this case, they're looking at how it looks all together. And you'll remember that I mentioned that I got kind of sloppy with some of that stucco on the wood, but you might notice that that's really hard to tell now because of that weathering effect. Okay, and that's it. That's what I wanted to show you. I want to show you how to paint Tudor style walls, so that which can be, again, applied to buildings such as this, or, you know, tiny pieces such as this. I hope that you learned something today, and, you know, if nothing else, I hope you learn that painting these, you don't have to have a perfect steady hand. You can be sloppy. I'm sloppy. You don't have to buy expensive tools. You can do this with a $5 pack of brushes from Walmart along with 50-cent apple barrel paints. You know, I think the most expensive thing that I do would be the wash that I use, which does require like a $15 bottle of that matte stuff that I've linked in the thing below. But, you know, it's not as out of reach, at least, as I personally used to think it was. Let me know in the comments below what you think about my process, if you have any maybe tips you want to share with me, or if you've tried it out yourself. And hey, find me on Twitter. I'm on Twitter at thiseffingm, and show me if you make an attempt to paint like in this style. Show me what you come up with. I would love to see you giving this a try, because I just think it's great. Also, if you think I should make more tutorial videos, let me know. This is again the first time I've ever tried this, so you know, it's maybe this becomes a thing. I don't know. You know, the market may be kind of flooded with painting tutorials already, but hey, who knows? Anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. You know, don't forget to hit that like, hit that subscribe button, and I look forward to seeing you next time.